Welcome to another edition of the Energy Podcast. Right alongside Dr. Energy herself, Ellen Wald. Ellen, last time we talked about the beaches in Florida, or at least Jacksonville, were somewhat open. Are there bodies in the streets at this point? Not people walking, like actual dead bodies in the streets.
So I did see a dead armadillo the other day. Could have been a coronavirus casualty.
It will be added to the statistics. I can promise you that.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is interesting because, armadillos actually carry Hansen's disease, which is more commonly known as leprosy, for which, back in like biblical times, people were quarantined outside of the camp, for having leprosy. So, if you really want to get biblical here, but so I did see. Yeah. even the armadillos, which carry the leprosy or die. So I think that was a casualty of a big storm we had, and it was drowned in a ditch. So, I actually have not been to the beach yet, so I can't report on it for myself, just, the way things have gone. But maybe able to get there this week and we'll report back. But Floridians are not dying in the streets as far as I can tell. In fact, I would venture to say that there's probably less deaths just because fewer people are dying in traffic accidents, because we have some really horrible drivers.
Yeah, let me ask you this. You might have know this answer, might not. One of the things that's been kind of bad around is if just with a snap of a finger, we open the economy around the world for more, we're not really sure how the citizens are going to respond. Has there been any indication from the early results of how people are responding? I mean, as time goes on, obviously, you figure that more people will be willing to come out, but just what they call the exit polls. Are the exit polls telling us anything about what people's willingness might be want to do when they do open stuff up?
I really wish there were exit polls, because I think that the psychological aspect of this is really going to, in many respects, determine the shape of the economic recovery, and that's a huge issue, and it gets into oil demand. I think as well. And it's really not clear. I mean, I'm speaking just based on, like people I talk to or things that I read, on online from friends or friends of friends. And, I think that at least the population, the sample that I'm getting is saying that people are scared. And some people have an understanding that this is something that needs to be done, but it does seem like people are pretty nervous and are kind of, at least those that can, are kind of settling in and thinking, we're going to be spending the whole summer like this. I do think that if people are expected to return to work or school, that will really kind of push people. But if they let people make a decision about it, I think that the fear factor is pretty strong, and that may keep a lot of people tamped down.
I think the government's with whatever the government's willingness to subsidize the fear, real or not, it's just what it is. The fear moving forward will also play a factor. If the government says, hey, we can't keep funding stimulus packages and stuff, then that will kind of force people's hand as well. So I think you're right about school and work, but also if there is no hard school or work deadline and there's continued stimulus to people across America, then that might hurt us. But let's go across the world to a country we haven't spoken about in a little while now. Nigeria. Oil slump, coronavirus creates a perfect storm for Nigeria's economy. Let me just say, you could take that and put Texas in there, North Dakota, Oklahoma. You could put a lot of. They can just repurpose this article for a lot of places right now, I believe.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Yeah. I thought it was. I thought it was interesting because I think a lot of people have this idea of Nigeria and as maybe something it isn't. And so, in particular, one of the interesting things to think about Nigeria is the fact that they were totally overproducing on their OPEC quota before this past December and got called out like in a big way at the OPEC meeting. I mean, they actually brought the Nigerian oil minister on into the press conference and basically were like, say something. And so he basically had to say, like, we're now committed. We're going to be cutting. We're actually going to do it. And it was kind of like, kind of like prodded him up there and made him like whip himself. in a, OPEC press conference-y way, which is interesting. And so, but other interesting things. So Nigeria's break-even oil price, according to this article, is $133.
Okay, let's just stop right there. What? I saw that. It's like, if that's true, then okay. You point that out. Let's back up why that's really important. In Nigeria, where oil accounts for 60% of government revenue and 90% of foreign exchange. Okay, so those are your numbers that are dependent on oil. If break-even is at 133, even if we round down to 130, even if you round down to 100, if that's even remotely in the ballpark, they are never going to fix this problem. I mean, theoretically, oil can get back over 100 at some point, but I'm just saying they've got to diversify that economy. They got a problem.
60% of government, and this is and I gotta say that, like, Nigeria is not Saudi Arabia. Like, this is a country with a lot of like not that Saudi Arabia doesn't have a lot of educated people. It does, but like, this is a country with other things going for it as well. Yes, they do have the Niger Delta Avengers, or at least they did, which was both simultaneously the absolutely greatest terrorist group name I've ever seen. Sounds like a comic book.
So it says that it's obviously the government corruption, and I don't know what all they encapsulate here, but I believe Nigeria at least may still be one of the top 5 countries in the world for pipeline theft. So I don't that's lumping that in there, but that would be part of it. But high refining cost, that would be, you'd have to wonder what percentage of that is driving up that 133 break-even price. But I mean, if you're saying, and I don't know enough about what kind of drilling and what they're doing in Nigeria, but you got to get that number down to like 50. I mean, that's a lot of corruption and a lot of inefficiencies in the refining process.
Yeah. Not just that, but you've got oil fields that are run by Royal Dutch Shell and Exxon Mobil. So it's, they're hiring other oil companies to run stuff. I like this fact. At least 7 vessels carrying 12 million barrels of unsold Nigerian oil, which is 7 days of production, are, according to Vortexa, currently stranded at sea. I don't think they're stranded. More that like they have nowhere to go. I don't think they're like floating idly like ships in the Sargasso.
So,
but
it's a very interesting. It's like you're a historian. Who was it that went into the doldrums and had to start the horses over and stuff? That's kind of the visual you're thinking of. They're just
it's like dumping oil.
It says Nigeria is a drug addict about to go cold turkey, and if you kind of think about if that is what's going to happen, it could have massive impacts on obviously the industry, but the industry from the standpoint of if you had a revolution, a revolt, or whatever you want to call it, upheaval, you might see where Nigeria could come out of the coronavirus pandemic as not really an effective producer anymore as well. You talk about these big companies. The big companies might pull out, and then so it could be that you see. Would you say it was 10 million barrels a day or something like that? Their production. What was the number you said? 12 million barrels a day, which is 7 days production. So you could start seeing that number drastically reduce if coming off of the drug creates political instability, because the population, what are they going to do for jobs, for food? There's a lot of questions that this could lead to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a huge issue, particularly because Nigeria's, they have I guess a democracy, or at least a democracy with a lot of corruption, but a democracy nonetheless. It says, so their president was reelected to a second term last year. He was also the leader of the military government in 1985 that presided over some sort of crisis, which had resulted in him being pushed from power.
Now or is that someone else I'm thinking of?
I don't know. I've never been able to keep this stuff straight. It may say. But it's also interesting because we're looking at a country unlike, Saudi Arabia or Kuwait or Dubai. Those countries are essentially kingdoms, monarchies, whatever, sheikdoms, authoritarian systems. And while I don't think anyone will call Nigeria's democracy, the strongest, it is still a country with, there is democracy there. And so I think it'll be, I hate to say it's like very interesting to see what happens, because that's like a sad thing to say, but I think that any kind of political unrest that we would see in a more authoritarian oil companies because of these low prices and lack of production, I think would be amplified, and we might see sooner in a place like Nigeria.
Let me look this up. I think we talked about this on the show before. Yeah, so this is back in 2012. I don't know how current this is, but this is back in 2012. Shell spends internal documents reveal that the company spent $383 million over 3 years protecting staff and installations in the Niger Delta region. So, you think about just what they're putting out for security. It's 40%. That's what I thought it was. It's 40% of their expenditure was for Nigeria. And so you start thinking about that. If you have political instability and Shell's already putting out a huge budget to protect their stuff there, well, the profits are down because the prices are down, and you need more forces. It might just be a time where you have to cut losses and go on about your business.
Yeah. Anyway, I think it's an interesting. I think it will be telling. I think you'll see the kind of political problems that we are kind of looking for or say will happen in authoritarian states. I think that actually Nigeria is much more likely to experience this because it is a democracy. It does have, you have an active population, whereas if you look at these other countries, they're not, these are countries where people are not used to participating in a political process in any way. And it's just not, I think we're a lot less likely to see, I think we're more likely to see more steps taken towards repression before we'd actually see any kind of uprising.
Right. Okay. All right, let's go to Reuters. How the U.S. could use the taxpayer dollars to save oil and energy companies. Wait, hold on. Let me just say something real quick. As I understand it, our government spends more than it makes. Is that correct?
What? Right. No way. Come on.
Therefore, when they say use our dollars, they don't actually mean use our dollars. They mean they could steal from us by printing more dollars and devaluing the few dollars that we have and use those dollars, right? So there's no actual dollars. It's like Scrooge McDuck and they're just swimming in dollars. Like, oh, we're going to use these. These don't exist. Yeah, so before we go any further, let's just say that. The U.S. federal government is looking at a whole bunch of alternatives to support oil and other energy companies. Treasury Secretary Stephen Munchkin Man, whatever his name is, Munchin. I don't know.
Now I want Munchkins.
Said on Friday. So, Ellen, this is maybe the scariest coronavirus bailout story I've heard. We talked about this some today on the Takes One Guys podcast. Some of these ideas around bailing out oil and gas companies is quite scary.
Yeah, and I had like a whole... I don't know. I feel like I keep repeating the same conversation online over and over and over with people who are like, why can't the U.S. just cut production across the board like Oman is doing? They're cutting 23% from every field, so everyone, is in pain equally. Or nationalize. Someone tagged me yesterday in something like, could the U.S. nationalize the oil industry? Like, no.
Not without a big fight.
No, you just in fact, interesting fact, putting on my historian hat, when I was doing my dissertation, I came across this interesting little thing that happened during World War II, which was that the guy who was, at that time we had an oil czar. We used to have a drug czar and we had an oil czar. His name was Harold Ickes. He himself was a particularly bizarre character and had all sorts of weird personal life things. But anyway, he came up with this idea because the war was we were kind of the end of the war-ish. And he, and they were concerned because the U.S. was basically fueling the entire war effort. There were some, other areas, but mostly it was it was American oil. And so at that point, they weren't positive they were going to win, but even when they knew they were going to win, they were well, we might end up starting a war with the Soviet Union right after, so we need to make sure we have more oil. So they're so he came up with this idea that the U.S. government should buy foreign oil reserves, and so he got authorization to start this corporation called the Petroleum Reserves Corporation, which is wonderfully abbreviated PRC, which sounds just like the People's Republic of China. So they got this Petroleum Reserves Reserves Corporation, something like that. This was like so long ago. I'm like dredging this stuff up from my brain. And they tried to buy the company. The company that they tried to buy was none other than the precursor company to Aramco. Yeah, because the two oil companies that owned it at the time, it was called CASA, California Arabian Standard Oil Company. It was owned by California Standard and I think Jersey Standard, which later became Exxon, but don't quote me on that. I'd have to go back to the old dissertation and look it up. But they were basically like shut down and thought they'd like to sell. And guess what the big issue was and why the U.S. never bought this company? Nothing about like the moral or legal implications of the U.S. owning foreign oil reserves. No, it was the price.
Oh, wow.
He didn't want to pay as much as these guys wanted to sell it for. And so by the end of the negotiation, they're like, you know what? I think we'd rather sell shares to Standard Oil of New York and Texaco, and we'll bring them on. And then they went on to form Aramco.
Oh, wow.
So, you know, and like that idea then died, and Harold Hickey's also left, and FDR died and all that. But it's like, but even if like the other idea, I think, or one of them is some sort of bailout where the government gets equity stakes, kind of like what happened with the car manufacturers in 2008, right? That's the idea here. And I just don't see that there. I don't think there's any political will for this. There's no way Congress is going to pass a bailout for oil companies.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, let's just kind of walk through. If you talk about just producers, just to kind of keep it simple, producers need a certain, like we talked about a minute ago, break-even price. They need to be above the break-even price to make money. There's a lot of ways they can do that, whether it's through a hedge or just through the natural price of the market, whatever. But that's what they need. So when you sit back and say, well, we're going to bail out the oil industry, well, the price is below the break-even. I think it's a safe assumption, especially when it's negative. It's below the break-even price. So how does one achieve that, Ellen? Because you say, well, let's just say that Ellen Wald production is producing, producers are producing 1 million barrels a day. So is the Trump administration going to say, well, we're going to set a floor price of $45 a barrel and pay you $45 a barrel to produce oil? Now, is that new production or is that old production? Because that's the first question you got to answer. And then are they going to buy all 1 million barrels or just a percentage of your barrels? Okay, because then you might have some barrels that are going for $10 or whatever. You start working through just the different layers of how this works itself out. It seems like it would just be a terrible idea. And then if you just fund the current production that's online, you buy those barrels, where are you going to put them at? We only have 78 million barrels of capacity for the SPR right now. So where does this oil go? I mean, you're going to go buy some tankers and put them down the Gulf? I mean, you start... the best, it's a terrible idea, but the thing that makes the most sense was pay them to shut it in, but then you still have all the oil field service workers that are laid off. So if they do it, it would be a terrible idea. They probably would still fail. And then you would have like Exxon or someone like that coming in wanting to buy those assets. And then does the government get the carry on the back and get to be part of Exxon then? You start, and for a listener might can answer one of these questions and say, well, you can do this. But the problem is there's a multitude of questions that you start asking. And it just doesn't work itself out. It sucks. It's not viable. And the fact that this is kind of getting some wind, do you think that Trump is serious, or do you think he's just he kind of neglected the oil field base when the price started to drop? He really focused on the coronavirus and, the shutdowns of, the economy, this, that, and the other. But now he's kind of picking up this oil and gas mantle with OPEC call. Do you think he's more appealing to his base, or do you actually think he's going to try to push through a bailout? Or he knows it won't work and he's going to try to push it through, let Congress shoot it down, and then he can run on the fact, I tried to save you guys?
I think it's the latter. I think it's he'll try to push it through. I think he'll try to push that through, or I think he'll definitely. I think that they're definitely going to try again with the SPR purchase.
Okay.
So I think that's because
what's that? That's 7 days worth of production is all it is.
It's not that much. It's not that much, but it's like a thing he wants. I think it's like a thing he can say, but I don't think it has much to. I don't think it'll do that much, but they definitely still want to do that. They didn't rent that much space in the SPR. That was based on demand. There just wasn't. There were that many people who wanted to rent the SPR space for storage, but they're still hoping, I think, to fill the rest with purchases. But yeah, it's not going to save the oil industry, obviously.
Can I
But
float out a crazy idea?
Please do.
It's pretty new. It's cutting edge.
I think I know what you're going to say, but go
Open
ahead.
the economy.
Well, I hear that it should right now, either right now or in an hour, depending on they didn't say Central Time or not. I hear the governor of Texas is supposed to lay out.
That dude's been talking like a month. What he's gonna have something like I thought they're supposed to do something Friday and then Thursday and then oh gracious, I don't know. Is he saying he's supposed to go out today? Nate may have a better on that.
Said press conference at 2:30, okay. But I don't know if that's your 2:30 or my 2:30.
Yeah, according to the press release going along with the announcement, any remarks that the governor makes today will be delayed by a week until their effects take place.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like it's been crazy. It's like, well, we're gonna do this. It's like, whoa, okay, cool. Like, oh no. So, no, I mean, like we've commissioned. What's it called? A strike force, Nate? What was it called? The governor's commissioned a strike force.
A governor's strike force.
We have a governor's strike force to figure out how to repair the oil and gas industry. I offered up, just open the economy. Like, that's free. You're going to pay me. A cabinet seat would be nice, but that's free. It's just a crazy radical idea. I get it. It's probably not been thought of by a lot of the elites, but it seems like that's how it was before. Maybe we should go back to that. Ellen, what would you suggest we do to solve this? We have an oil pandemic now. We have a full-on oil pandemic.
An oil pandemic. This is going to sound, I mean, maybe this sounds bad, but like, just stop trying to save what's there, because anything that they try to do is instead of let everyone experience the same problems, failures, and then make it much easier to get to start up. Forget about these bailouts and picking winners and losers and trying to manage it. It's not manageable. Yeah. Just let everyone fail. And then just make it so much easier to start a new business, to restart, to, so much easier. Cut the regulations to apply for permits, to license, just to open a bank. All of these things take so much time, and means that if a company fails, it will take so much time to restart. Just make it so much easier to restart. And that way, you'll have failures, but you won't be picking winners and losers, which I think is most unfair.
So I agree. And I would say 99.999% of times I am anti any bailout. And I'm not advocating for bailouts now because of what the problem is. However, the government is actually picking winners and losers by forcing the shutdown of economy and saying this is essential, this is not essential. So the best way to undo that is to not be in that business at all and just open everything back up.
I think the two go hand in. I would say the two policies go hand in hand.
I agree, but I am sympathetic to someone who said, listen, my business was healthy, it was good, and then the government came in and said, you're not essential, you're shut down, and I've got bills to pay, I've got, so I do, it's a little bit harder to say no bailout from that perspective because the government actually literally caused the collapse for some companies, not necessarily oil and gas companies, although they did as well. So I'm not pro bailouts, not changing my position, but I do think the argument is a little different this time because the government actually made policies to ruin companies. And so
I completely agree, but then they need to bail out everyone. Not like you can apply for this and if you can get it, then the way that you got, how you got a bailout, if you had the cell phone number of a banker who could get you to the front of the line. And that's how they ended up with bailouts for companies like, for these big companies, for the company that owns Ruth's Chris Steakhouse, which is a chain, and all of those things. People, that's how these big companies, the LA Lakers got
Really?
bailout.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, apparently they're giving the money back because it comes out that these big companies got bailed, and people are like, what the heck? And so then they give the money back. But by the time it gets to someone who can use it, their business is already dead.
I don't know.
They killed these businesses. It's their responsibility, in my mind, to make it easier for these people to come back and to provide them with the support that they need to get back. One of the other things you have to do is you have to make it so that none of the late payments or anything that happened during this time, none of that should be held against you in your credit rating.
That's good.
So that people can apply for, new loans and stuff to restart and not have anything that happened as a result of this, held against them in their credit rating, because that can hurt someone. If people have the psychological ability to restart something or to start something new after something has failed through no fault of your own is immense. And the government should do everything they can to help people get over that hump.
Get out the way. That's what I would say, Abbott. Get out of my way. You are the problem. That's just go home. I don't need you. I agree with what you're saying, and it's so frustrating because it's what we will read in 3 to 4 months is oh well, now this was an unintended consequences, or Betty's shop went out because of this, and it's like, well, yeah, of course. What did you think was going to happen?
Of course. The minute they did this, I said this could last 3 days, but after 3 days or a week, businesses are dead. They've already killed them. Now that it's been going on a month, 2.5 months. My God, nothing. It's people. Forget it. They killed it. They killed the economy.
It's not desired. It's most of them, except for, was it Switzerland or Sweden? Which one? One of them is stayed up. I am
Sweden.
Looking for real estate there. I won't be able to afford it because I'll be so broke. But I might go Airbnb it or rent a room or something.
Oh yeah, no kidding. I think Switzerland did shut down, but they're already reopening it. I know they're already. But one of the questions I have, and this is kind of off of the oil path, but one of the things that I said I think is going to happen is that you're going to see an exodus of people from big cities like New York, Boston, Philadelphia, San Francisco, whatever, to not just the suburbs, but possibly even to other states, because if you've been stuck in a tiny apartment for 2 months and you're the kind of person who believes that this is going to happen multiple times because of Corona, then don't you want to go somewhere where you have a big house and a big backyard and you can at least hang out there? I have family in New York, and I honestly don't know how they are dealing with being literally they've been in a 900 square foot apartment for over a month and haven't left.
Well, I brought this up. I don't think I brought it on the show. I brought up to Nate and Josh. When this first started shutting down, it's okay, we don't want you to leave your house. We want you to quarantine. Okay, well, I have a house, so it's just me and my family here. We only, people only come in that we want to come in. If we exit, we exit. So we kind of the we're not overly paranoid about it. But I'm saying, but the contact that we're getting is pretty manageable. But if you live in an apartment and you go down to do your laundry, you push the button, you push the handrail, you touch the washing machine. So when you're confining these people to these apartment complexes, and when the virus gets in there and someone touches something, you're actually increasing the chance by confining them. So I think your point's very well made, that once people start realizing, wait, you held me in here, and that actually kept me around people that had it, whereas I could have went, maybe to the library and sat in the back by myself all day, or I could have figured out how I wanted to. Maybe I'm a member of a club and I could went to the back of the club, like a social club, or I could have handled this a lot differently, but instead I had to go touch the same button and do this as everyone else. That might create a mass exodus. And the question I wondered about is, because I've thought about that same thing, is will that increase or decrease oil demand? Because if people move to the suburbs, do they work from home or do they drive in? If they drive in, it could actually increase demand in some capacities. If they stay at home, then it could decrease demand. So I've wondered about that.
Yeah, no, I have too. Are people going to move and just telecommute, or are they going to drive more? But I think that will we see a reduction in actual commuting, because that's a lot of oil demand is people commuting. Oh, completely. But then you also have the added factor of apparently, and I said, not a scientist, not a medical anything or other, but there seem to be saying that a lot of cases, people don't get this virus by shopping at the grocery store. They get it on the subway, in mass transit and public transit. So are people going to be less will people in New York be I'm not taking the subway anymore? Because and I totally get it. Whenever I visit New York, I'm oh, I will wear gloves when I'm on the subway, yeah, exactly. I've been there in the winter and been I don't want to get sick. I'm no, I'm going to wear my winter gloves on the subway so that I don't, so I totally get that. And I think it's a real thing, but, will that mean more people will either want to drive or carpool or work from home, or what? It could really, and how will that change gasoline demand? Also think about it we know we know that the airline industry is shot. If people are able to go on vacation, if they either feel comfortable doing it or have the money to do it, which is not clear, but say they do, like, are we going to see a huge uptick in gasoline demand this summer because people will drive out to like a national park as opposed to flying to Italy?
Right. No. Yeah. You're seeing reports about, there was something about someone who flew from Miami to New York and they were upset because not everyone had on masks and stuff like that. And that's gonna be a thing. Another thing is commercial flights. Will companies be sending their salespeople all across the U.S. or they say, hey, listen, hop on a Zoom call with your clients once, and then just talk to them like that. Listen, we're not going over there. It's just not cost effective anymore. So you could see a shift. We're still too early to know where that's at, but there are definitely things to be concerned about. And it could really change. I was joking before this a few weeks ago about re-examining the market based upon the new supply metrics. Well, we might have some new demand metrics that we don't really like either. That could be detrimental.
Right, but so I think that if you look at what happened in 2008, you can get a fairly good idea about that companies will cut travel, at least initially. I think that they will think that they can, do these Zoom calls or whatever, but I think that as things really start to get better, maybe, I don't know how long that will take, but once it really, I think that they will return to face-to-face meetings, because I think that if you can afford it, if you're not in like an austerity budget for a company or something, then face-to-face is going to be seen as preferable to Zoom if people are not scared of actual travel and a threat to their health. And that is a psychological factor that I think we don't really know yet what the psychological impact is.
We also have to think about the litigation that's going to come with, Bob tells salesman to fly to California, and the salesman says, well, listen, I'm nervous about flying. I might get the corona. And he gets it, and then he's sued. And, there's
that's a really good point. Like, yeah. What if someone sues for getting corona because they went on a work trip?
I think we've got a little bit. I mean, it will happen. I agree, but there will be some folks. If I had employees like, hey, I don't want to go there because I might get corona, you're in a tough spot because you need the thing to get done. You need that employee to do it. But if they go get corona, am I liable now for not taking care? So there's we have created a wasp nest. So, and we are beating it to death, and they're circling. So. Let's solve another country's problems. Let's go to Saudi Arabia. Those are much easier to solve. What Saudi Arabia can do to lead again on oil. This is from Ellen R. Wald. Some call her Dr. Energy. This is via Bloomberg. Ellen, I hadn't seen you in Bloomberg recently, so I guess you're back on the Bloomberg bandwagon.
Yeah, I had a lot of stuff going on. Took a little break from that. This is my latest. I actually been thinking about this piece for a while and thought it might be too controversial to recommend the removal of Saudi Arabia's energy minister as the number one thing. But I had some conversations with some people and thought that it might not be bad to pitch it. And my editor thought it was new and different. It's
definitely will get readers on the page.
So what was interesting is I thought it was going to be. I thought it might get some serious negative, negative commentary. I think that the title that they gave was pretty. Yeah, that it didn't ring any bell. It didn't send any flares up, which was good because the last time that happened, it was way too controversial a title. It did get some pushback, online from some people, including someone who suggested that I was being paid by shell companies to write this.
Okay, just pause here. Whoever is paying people to write people and to say stuff, please call me. I am for sale right now.
Yeah.
Please call. I am here.
I want to say they don't have any money to pay anyone to write stuff. So but it's so funny because I've been accused of being paid by Qatar, being paid by Saudi Arabia, being paid by Iran, and being paid by shell companies. Just for the record, I am paid by none of those people.
But if they want to pay, I will take it. Ellen, my God, I don't have any integrity.
I will send them straight to you, Ryan. So anyway, I was not paid by anyone to write this article. write this piece, but Saudi Arabia said in this press release that it wants to basically like regain, that it supports oil market stability. And I was thinking about it. I was like, if Saudi Arabia really wants to be a leader or whatever in the oil market, I don't think it can control the oil market the same way it did in the 70s. But if it wants to be a leader, then because in my mind, it really abdicated that leadership when it made rash decisions based on emotionally driven decisions in March, and then failed to correct those policies when it became clear that demand could not support the kind of oil production it was putting in the market. And I was the first to defend Saudi Arabia's initial decision to increase production, because in my mind that did seem like the best policy to increase revenue. But then, like 2 or 3 days later, demand, once everything started shutting down, that's when it became clear that there was no more demand. And in my mind, that's when Saudi Arabia really should have reevaluated. And the fact that it didn't, and that to me, when that kind of thing happens, it just seems like you need to blame someone. Whether or not the oil minister is to blame for the policy is almost irrelevant. But like from like a stance of, I don't think that that the oil market is confident in him and his leadership, whether he's being directed by someone else or it's his ideas, doesn't really matter. But that the purpose with removing him would be to replace him with someone who's from Dhahran, because I think for many years Saudi Arabia's oil policy was really run by the guys at Aramco, and they and the politicalness or whatever of it has really basically driven away confidence. And so they need to restore that, and then they could cut production unilaterally. There are other things they could do, but people were really upset. I mean, some people were like attacking me, online, like, this is a bad idea. People are totally confident in him. He's doing the right thing. And then you look at oil prices and you're like, really? Yeah.
Well, it's tough because let's say that this, for argument's sake, it was all his idea. And he looks down and he goes, I messed up. It's very hard for him to come out and say, I messed up, I want to change things, because people will say, oh, well, you just, what are you doing? You just proved you're incompetent. Let's say it wasn't his idea, and whoever told him to do it, or whoever, whatever group, whatever it was, they want to change now. Well, again, it's the same thing. If he comes out and says, I messed up. So if you think about, like in football, sometimes the head coach will fire the offensive coordinator, the defensive coordinator, even though it might have been his scheme and his idea. Ultimately, he removes that person to bring in someone else to buy a little bit more time, to change it up. Everyone feels a little more confident. Okay, they're making changes. So I think that there is a even though it might be bad for this particular person, it sometimes having someone fall on the sword is what needs to happen, just to kind of change the paradigm. The real question, I think, Ellen, is will this move? And I don't know what the Russians and the Saudis thought the demand shock, to use that term, was going to be from the coronavirus. But will we look back and say, and I don't think that they were doing it to, I don't think their top initiative was to fight shale producers. Obviously, they were aware that was going to be collateral damage, and it was somewhere in their calculation. But I don't think that was the number one reason they did it. But will they look a year or two from now and go, okay, well, now there's only the majors out in the Permian. We really kind of screwed this thing up here by going all in, instead of pushing the chips in, like a week later everyone shuts down and go, okay, hold on, we didn't listen, we're going to fight. It's like, like in the schoolyard, you get ready to fight and the teacher walks up like, okay, I'm gonna get you after school. So kind of say, we're going to fight this out. Yeah. We're going to wait till the market's normal, and then we're going to see, because what you're seeing over here is, I think Barron's this weekend said 70 to 80% of Cushing is full physically, and the other 20 or 30% is bought up via contract. So Cushing, assuming they're right, is basically full, and so you're going to start to see acceleration of these shale producers filing for bankruptcy, or trying to sell their assets, or whatever they're going to do. That's going to happen, and the fewer players there are means the more control the big companies have. And if anyone's in position to respond to the market, it would be Exxon owning 1/4 of the Permian, going, oh, okay, our price is going down. We're gonna we're going to scale this back, or prices going down. Well, our refining margins are really good, so we're going to keep things going and keep the price down for a while. So, it's not that they would be colluding, but you'd almost have like a mini OPEC out there in the Permian where if it maybe 10, 15 producers, and they all would understand each other's business fundamentally different. So can they, I'm not saying intentionally, but did they just kind of miss the mark with what happened here and create a supervillain almost?
Yeah. I mean, I do. I think that there were plenty of excuses and reasons that they could have taken to kind of backtrack on this that they just didn't. I mean, they could have used coronavirus. They could have, there were a lot of things that they could have done to get themselves out of this situation, and they didn't. And it just, and that's where I think there's a failure in leadership. They didn't even have to come out and admit, oh, we were wrong. Like you said, there were a lot of other things that they could have done. And I do think that they really should, I do think that you can't predict what the Permian's going to look like after. But I think that your scenario that you painted is a serious, like I think that would be my guess as to what things look like.
Well, I think
and while that would be, I think, sad for the way that what we like America, we like to think American industry is like, anyone can get in and all that stuff. I do think that the picture that you draw is probably the
and just to be clear, I'm not saying that you won't have small independent producers. I'm saying that their hold on the market will be irrelevant. So they can be reducing, but they're not really getting. So let me just, I know we're getting up to the clock here, we've got about 10 minutes. So let me tell you one of the things, as I looked at some of the storage things this weekend and kind of thought about some implications here. The futures contract for June is down to $12, I think, 12 change, right? Yeah. So what's just hypothetical? Tell me where I'm wrong or where I'm missing here. But let's just say we go negative again for a longer period of time, or we just stay at $10 to $12 for 30 more days.
Yeah.
Whatever companies who have the banks kind of halfway having their back, those are gone. So you're going to start seeing them file for bankruptcy or stop production, try and do whatever they can. They will be in the final throes of their days of existence, right? And so I got to think, okay, well, if you have a lot of independent producers start filing for bankruptcy, and you might know this answer, what happens to their contract? So let me give you an example. Ellen has a contract to produce so much oil. Ryan has a contract to be the pipeline company to transport the oil, and Nate is the refiner. Okay, well, I'm in a pretty good spot right now because we got to get oil out the ground, and so I'm moving it. But then you go file for bankruptcy, and then Exxon comes and buys you. Where does that leave me? Does that leave me on? Because Exxon doesn't necessarily need me anymore, but are they contractually obligated to hold me? Because if they're not, and Exxon can get a stranglehold on, they already have the refining, they get more upstream, and then they cut the midstream, then you could really see some devastating impacts to the job market here in Texas, because there could be less midstream competition as well. So
that is a question for the bankruptcy lawyers and for the petroleum industry lawyers, because that I think it depends on how the contract is structured. I think it also depends on whether or not the sale goes through. Is it like, would the sale have gone through through a bankruptcy court? Because like you go bankrupt and then basically you have a judge who kind of says how you're going to pay off your debts or restructure it or whatnot. And that doesn't mean that the company dissolves. Companies can emerge from bankruptcy and go on to do just great. So bankruptcy is a state where you have protection from your creditors. So it depends on how
I don't think in this case the banks are going to relend the money, though. So,
right. But I think it depends like how the judge says. Sometimes they can say like this debt is canceled, or this is being sold. And I think depending on how that process goes, it would depend on that. And that's a really good question. I mean, I would ask, I think you'd really have to ask like a petroleum industry lawyer, because
even if the midstream contracts stay in place, it doesn't mean that, once they're, so let's just say that you had 100 wells that I was supposed to hook up for you. You go through bankruptcy and Exxon agrees to flow the oil through my 100 wells, but then Exxon buys your acreage and you have another 300 that they can drill. It doesn't mean they're going to use me for the next 300, right? So then all of a sudden you can start seeing the squeeze from that size. And so because they are a diversified company, so I think that's a trend. And I'm not trying to be doom and gloom like it's but I'm just sitting back going, I wonder what are some of the outcomes where you look at things today and go, it's the frackers are in trouble. Well, how are the midstream companies, how are they going to survive if you start seeing Exxon, who doesn't necessarily need them, or a Chevron or whomever doesn't necessarily need them? How are they going to survive? Now, obviously, some of them get bought up or other deals, but that's something else to follow.
Yeah. Before we go, can we talk about this that I just noticed? Apparently, Oklahoma is asking the president to declare coronavirus a, quote, act from God, because that way they can, apparently they think that will help them can deal with the overproducing glut. I think if he declares it an act from God, then they can argue that it's a force majeure, which will allow oil companies to halt operations without risking the land leases.
See, that's exactly what was proposed to the TRCC. I don't know if I told you about that. Someone's like, we want the TRCC to say that we have to prorate, and we want you to petition the governor or the Congress of Texas to make sure that we can hold our leases. So they want the government to prevent them from drilling, and the government to lock up the leasehold. Like if that's not communism, what is? I mean, like you have to be. I'm sorry, I understand it sucks for you, but if you're asking the government to prevent you from drilling, there's nothing stopping them from going out and renegotiating leases with the landowners.
Yeah, why don't they just go renegotiate them? Yeah, well, and I think we're going to see a lot of renegotiating of all sorts of leases and contracts. I know, like my family had was going to rent a house somewhere, for like a summer vacation, and they're like, I don't know, should we pay the next installment, like deposit? And my sister, who's a lawyer, said, well, why don't you just ask to renegotiate the contract? Like my dad was like, oh, that's an idea. Like, yeah, you can do that. That's a possibility.
And here's what would happen is that some landowners would say, no, I don't want to renegotiate. I need the money. Yeah. Some would say, listen, whoa. Listen, you're paying me, pennies on the dollar. Please hold my lease until the price is above this, but and so you might be able to deal where the guy who you might say, well, Ellen Wald wants the production, and you say, well, here's Ellen, I'll cut you a check right now for $700 for the next 12 months. That's what you're going to get at these prices. Here's the futures. Here you go, and we're done. But everyone else, we can renegotiate or re-sign up for a longer period of time. So I don't know why. Maybe they've tried it and they failed, but it would seem to be that, man.
Yeah. So what I heard was that Oklahoma, their railroad commission, or whatever they call it, that they decide that they have ruled that economic waste is considered like current, like production below, like whatever it is considered economic waste, which is something that Texas hasn't done yet. But now they're asking for them to like be able to declare this a force majeure. It's interesting because in North Dakota, I believe, and I wrote about this. I'll include this in the show notes, and I'm going to actually have to look up my own article because I don't remember exactly what the terms were. But North Dakota already did something like that, or they declined to do it because they're getting something through. They have a industrial board or something. Yeah, what's it called? Here we go. The North Dakota Industrial Commission decided not to declare oil purchased at an economic loss as waste, and they're not considering proration. But the director of the North Dakota Department of Mineral Resources said that the state is issuing well waivers that allow companies to voluntarily shut wells. And I guess they have to do this maybe to maintain the leases. I don't know exactly, but that they've received requests for waivers for 5,000 wells so far, which they believe, they estimate that could result in a 300,000 barrel per day drop in production, which is not an insignificant amount.
I wonder if the waivers for public lands, because that's something that's been talked about in Texas, was needing waivers for the public lands to shut in and hold those leases as well. And the Texas state lands has said that go ahead and shut in. We'll re-up our lease with you. We're not going to penalize you. And so they want the big royalty check. They don't want the pennies on the dollar. So yeah, I don't know. I think that is that's pretty bad when you're asking for the government to. I know you're in a bad spot. I feel sorry for you, but it's pretty bad to say, government, don't let us work, and then also government, don't let someone else renegotiate their contract because you prevented us from working. That is. I will say this though. I will say this: Trump, Congress, Supreme Court, IMF, whoever's listening, World Bank. We will take money to not do this podcast. We are petitioning you right now to not listen to this podcast.
Oh, but I like it.
I do too. But we are petitioning you now to not do this podcast. Force majeure, and we're going to need a big payment. So, it's we have lost our collective minds, Ellen. Lost the minds. So,
yeah. Oh yeah.
And there was something else in there you said. Storage. I was going to ask you real quick about that. South Korea is filling up. Cushing's filling up. I know we talked about.
Everything's filling up. My pool is not open. I have a shed though.
By this time next week, are we going to hear stories of China buying more oil, or what's your thoughts on that?
China. I don't know. And there haven't been a lot of stories about that. I do think, however, that this, everyone's got their own, everyone's got a different estimate for when storage is going to fill up. And I think that people don't really know. And it's all modeling. It's all predictions. Nobody actually knows when storage is going to fill up. And it's a thing that every week Goldman Sachs comes out with a new oil storage will fill up at this time. We expect it's always different. It's like stupid models.
I agree. If the Barron's article is correct, though, then Cushing is full. It's just not literally full. So you know what I'm saying. So unless the oil just doesn't get delivered, it's for all intents and purposes, it's like having a hotel and you've just got reservations and they hadn't showed up yet. So I'm curious to see, because if that's the case, then the market should be looking at it going, oh, okay, well, which is.
What's the Cushing Hotel? I like that. I'm going to call it the Cushing Hotel.
Where will you be this week, Ms. Wald?
I will be on investing.com, and I am going to apparently be on the BBC radio show called Money Matters later tonight. If you are, so that'll be fun.
Cool.
Talking more about oil prices and the market, and can it go negative again, which I think it's unlikely. I don't know. What's your thought? I think it's unlikely that we'll see I think we're more likely to just kind of see these super low, $10 barrel stuff. I think that traders kind of learn their lesson, and it's not likely to go negative.
Yeah, I think I'm curious to see. I think it's possible if you get in a situation to where the market, as we know, tends to do, starts overreacting to positive news. And so there's not really an uptick in demand. It's just, it feels like there is, and it kind of messes with the market that way. Also, it's hard, but I tell you this, it's hard to reconcile some of the stocks that you see out there and some of the market positions with what the news is. And so, that's kind of got me concerned that maybe you're going to see another correction. And so I don't know. I know there's some housing numbers coming out this week and some other statistics that are going to come out that obviously won't be very good. So we need a flat line on unemployment numbers. That would be nice. That would be like saying no new unemployment this week. It's not going to happen. But we need to get
not going to happen. I think when the I think if you get a lot of states reopening stuff by May, you'll start to see. I think people may rehire people who were fired, and so that may compensate for the more people losing their jobs. So you may see that, but that's not necessarily a good thing.
Yeah, well, right, because you're not. They're not unemployed, but they were supposed to be employed, so they're reemployed. Right. It's good for them, but I know what you're saying. It's not the same as you have 5% unemployment naturally, and you go to 3%. Like, oh wow, the economy's doing great. It's like, okay, we're kind of. Yeah, it's like you gain 100 pounds and you lost 2. It's like, well, okay, it's good, but you still got that 100 sitting on you. So all right, listeners, thank you so much for tuning in, and we will be back next week.
See ya.